Welcome to the Sovereign Computing Show, presented by ATL BitLab. I'm Jordan Bravo, and this is a podcast where we teach you how to take back control of your devices. Sovereign computing means you own your technology, not the other way around.
This episode is sponsored by ATL BitLab. ATL BitLab is Atlanta's Freedom Tech hackerspace. We have co-working desks, conference rooms, event space, maker tools, and tons of coffee. There is a very active community here in the lab. Every Wednesday night is Bitcoin night here in Atlanta. We also have meetups for cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, decentralized identity, product design, and more. We offer day passes and nomad passes for people who need to use the lab only occasionally, as well as memberships for people who plan to use the lab more regularly, such as myself. One of the best things about having a BitLab membership isn't the amenities, it's the people. Surrounding yourself with a community helps you learn faster and helps you build better. Your creativity becomes amplified when you work in this space. That's what I think, at least. If you're interested in becoming a member or supporting the space, please visit us at atlbitlab.com. That's atlbitlab.com. All right, on to our show.
I'm Jordan Bravo, and this is the Sovereign Computing Show. I'm here today with Stephen DeLorme.
Yo, what up?
And today we're going to be talking about calendars and contacts, which does not sound like the sexiest and most exciting of topics, but it's incredibly important because we don't think about it, but our calendars and contacts just automatically sync for us because typically we're using something like Google if we have an Android phone, or if we have an iPhone, we're using iOS and it's syncing to iCloud, or maybe Microsoft, we have Outlook, email, and that's all syncing automatically as well. So if you were to want to start your sovereign computing journey and move off of one of these services, the first thing you're going to have to answer in order to keep your tech life going is, how are you going to sync your calendars and contacts? And this is, again, something that's most people don't think about, but it's incredibly important. So that's why we're going to talk about it in this episode, and we're going to talk about the different options and see what's out there and give some different ways you can go about it, some ranging a little bit harder, some you can use third-party services that make it easier, but we'll get into the pros and cons of all of that.
Sweet. Yeah, I mean, and just to kind of, I don't know, repipe from the last episode, it's like you were telling people, you don't have to go full on hosting your own Linux server, going over meshnet in the woods with, everything like that just overnight. You can be a little bit more sovereign by kind of replacing chunks of your tech stack one at a time as you feel comfortable. So we'll tackle one of these tech chunks today.
Absolutely. Great point. It's all about doing it incrementally in small, digestible chunks.
So calendars, contacts. So contacts would include a lot of stuff. Like calendars, I just think of okay, that's stuff like Google Calendar, Microsoft Outlook Calendar, I don't know, I think those are the top two. I guess Apple Calendar.
Mm-hmm.
Those would be the main ones that people use. Then for contacts, that would be like Outlook contacts, Google contacts, and then I guess your Android phone contacts and Apple phone contacts, and any other big services I'm missing there or use cases.
I think those pretty much corner the market.
Yeah. And so if you're on Android, I guess your Gmail contacts and your phone device contacts might actually be one and the same. Yeah, so those would be one and the same. And the same thing, where it gets a little bit different is if you're an iPhone user, then your Apple contacts and your Gmail contacts might not be the same. I don't actually know a lot of people who just use Apple Mail, actually. There's a lot of iPhone users, but none of them are using Apple Mail, I feel like.
Yeah. Well, one thing I want to point out is that what we're not going to talk about today is email itself. Using self-sovereign email is a big topic, and we're going to cover it in another episode. But people might not realize that your contacts and your calendar data are actually separate from your email. Now, they might get intermingled because you have two different syncing services going on. For example, if I'm on an iPhone and I also happen to use Gmail on my iPhone, if I have a Gmail account, I'm actually syncing to two different places. I'm going to have my Apple contacts, my phone contacts are going to be syncing to my iCloud account, and then my Gmail email contacts, some of them might be syncing to my iCloud account as well if I'm keeping them in the address book, but it's also going to be syncing to my Gmail account because Gmail by default syncs your email contacts.
Got it.
So we won't be covering the email itself part of it today, but we will be talking about those contacts and the calendars.
Where do we begin? What's the easiest way to get your contacts and calendars off of these big platforms?
So I would say the easiest way is to use a third party that is not completely self-sovereign in terms of having full control over your own data, but it's a much better option than the typical out-of-the-box experience like we've just talked about with the big tech options. And so what I'm going to point to right now is Proton. Proton has a whole suite. You've probably heard of Proton Mail, but they also they have a Drive service. And so Proton is not a sponsor or anything.
I
like
wish
that.
they were.
Yeah. It'd be great to get a sponsor from them, but I'm just recommending them because they have great UX and they do everything for you. You don't need to host your own server. And so simply by using their calendar and their contacts and stuff, you're going to get a much more private way of syncing across your devices because they use end-to-end encryption. So they don't have access to your data. And you're not tied into a single service like Google or Apple or Microsoft.
Yeah, and so and of course I pull up the mail screen, right when you said we're not going to be talking about mail, but just they don't, really talk too much on their website about contacts specifically. We were looking at the Proton website for anyone who's just listening to this, but it's I love Proton. I've been using them for years. It's very integrated into the mail service. So yeah, I think one of the advantages to the Proton, just for context specifically, is that, yeah, it's all encrypted. I mean, their business model is that they have a decent free plan, but they really kind of want you to upgrade to one of the paid plans so that, you have your messaging limits and all that removed. And they actually have a business model that's not around selling your data, unlike other services. So, I definitely like the UX of the Proton contacts is really great. One, I guess, complaint I had, not complaint, it works really good for what it is, but it is one of those things where I feel like I can't use it outside of the Proton ecosystem. Not that there's any gating or anything around it. It's just that I can use it within Proton Mail and within Proton Calendar, but I can't really say use it. I can't really pull it up on my phone and use it within my phone contacts, unless there's a feature I don't know about.
Interesting. Yeah, I wasn't aware of that. So it sounds like due to their client-side encryption, it can't transparently interface with your phone's contacts.
Yeah, unless there's something I'm not aware of. Unless maybe there's a Proton contacts app or something. I actually run Proton Mail and Proton Calendar. I run Proton everything, practically, but I don't think, Proton Bridge, I think, is for getting to using it with different email clients. That's what we're looking at here on the screen. Yeah, so it's not there's not a way I know of on my iPhone to just be oh, I'm going to open up, how you can open up the Apple Contacts app. I can't just open up the Proton contacts and dial somebody's phone number. Actually, let me try right now. Let me see if I go open Proton Mail, if I find somebody with a contact in Proton Mail, can I tap it and just pull up their phone number? I'm kind of curious. This is probably boring to someone who's just listening, but.
Oh, that would be good to know.
Yeah, I'm curious, just but I don't mean to do this to crap on Proton. They're really great. It's just, we have to understand the limitations of some of these things. I actually don't know if I can access the contacts directly here on the phone. There's not at least what I can see, there's not just a way to pull up Oh, wait. I can't just like pull up a list of contacts on this device. Well, at least not in this app. So yeah, it's really, really good. I would say I think the Proton contacts are like really great replacement if you are like using talking like strictly about email contacts, like not like all my friends and family that I need to text and all this kind of stuff. If you're just talking about like, I have a database of like 1,000 professional contacts that have accumulated over the past 10 years or whatever that I email from time to time. I want that encrypted and, I want to be in control of that data.
I'm curious, in that contacts, can you add fields for other data like phone numbers, address, that kind of thing?
Yeah, you sure can. I mean, I'm trying to pull it up on my phone right here. Well, actually, maybe we could just like look it up right here and see like Proton contacts. I'm gonna search for this real quick and see if we can pull up an image reference. Oh, wait. Here's a nice little website thing from them. Yeah, so I mean, they have like the features you would expect from like Gmail or Outlook. Like, you see here in this picture, we've got the person's name, the email, the phone number, the address. If memory serves, you can also add some like arbitrary fields and stuff like that, like more than one phone number and all of that. So it's pretty handy.
Okay.
And it definitely works really good in the web interface.
I'd be curious how it would work user experience wise if you, let's say on your phone, you were using Proton and you decided, I'm not going to use the built-in contacts book because I don't want it to sync to Apple or
Yeah.
Google. I just want to use Proton to sync all my contacts. I wonder if you can like click on or tap on the phone number of somebody and it'll open that up, a phone call to them, or, how that would work.
I bet it would, because I don't know how many of my contacts have phone numbers in them, so I don't know if I could do it. But I'm sure that it would open the phone number. But it would be a little weird to have to go to your mail app to find your contacts. So it'd be really great as if Proton had like a contacts app.
Yeah.
That would be dope. And hey, they have a pretty good track record of adding new apps over the years. Like I remember when it was just Proton Mail, and then, then they added like Calendar and Drive and VPN and all that. So they've been steadily kind of increasing their product scope. Maybe we talk about Calendar a little bit, since we also mentioned that.
Yeah, as a user of Proton Calendar, what's your opinion or review of their product?
I love it, but it has issues, but I do use it every single day. Like we use it for ATL BitLab for like managing, like company mail and calendar and all that. I would say just in terms of feeling like a pretty good, like it has the kind of like UI that you would expect from a modern calendar app. For anyone listening, I'm pulling up the Proton Calendar, website right now, and they have a nice little picture. This is exactly what I see in my calendar app. Just like, you can put a name, a date, choose time zones, location, add participants. If you do type in like people's names, it'll pull it from your Proton contacts list. So all of their like encrypted apps are interoperable. So yeah, all of that works really great. I think that it works pretty beautifully Proton user to Proton user. One annoying kind of issue that I've noticed is when people send me invites from Gmail to my Proton mail account and I accept it and it goes to my Proton calendar. Oh, it's been so annoying. Like let's say somebody updates. So it all works perfectly good. Somebody makes a repeating event. It repeats across my Proton calendar. What kind of sucks is when they go and they edit the event, like they change the time. And then it'll create like a duplicate event on my calendar. So I'll have like 2 events instead of 1. Or if they like cancel the event, like let's say they want to say like, okay, it's repeating indefinitely into the future. And then one day they edit the event and they say, okay, stop repeating it. So you would expect for all of the events in the past to remain on your calendar and all of the events in the future to stop repeating, right? That works for everybody like in the Gmail ecosystem. But in my Proton calendar, it'll like just keep repeating indefinitely. Like you can't kill it. And I've also noticed things where I make a repeating event sometimes on Proton Calendar, and like 9 times out of 10, it works when I invite somebody to a repeating event. But I've also had issues where somebody on Gmail could not see the repeating event. Like it just didn't show up on their calendar past the first one. So there's some interoperability concerns I have with the kind of like repeating events between vanilla and encrypted calendars, but I think it's a solvable challenge. These are one of the things that, like, when you start taking back your privacy and all of that, you sometimes break the ease of use with the outside world. But having said that, that kind of annoyance with repeating events for your average calendar event, it works and I love it and I'd recommend it.
Cool. Why don't we talk about some other options now?
Yeah.
So with Proton, and it sounds like they have a pretty good suite of tools right now. Hopefully it'll continue to get better. They're still fairly young compared with these other companies that we've been using for years. So there's a good chance that they'll start having a contacts app, dedicated contacts app, and it'll be interoperable with the rest of your stuff. Then the next option we're going to look at is taking advantage of an open standard called WebDAV. That's WebDAV. And
What a name.
yeah. WebDAV is a protocol or a specification. And here on the Sovereign Computing Show, one of the recurring themes that we're going to hit a lot is open specifications and open standards, because we would much rather be using something that can be a protocol, which is a language that can be spoken by anybody, and from company to company or service to service, it's interoperable. What we don't want to do is be sucked into a walled garden in a proprietary closed system that relies on a single company, a single point of failure. And then when we want to try to get our data out, either we can't, period, or we can. They make some nominal noises about allowing you to export your data, but it's a pain in the butt and it's hard to interoperate with others. So we really prefer, when we can, to be most sovereign with our computing. We want to be using open standards because that allows multiple competing sources, whether it's some crack dev in his basement, creating some app bot from scratch, or some company that's building on open source. It allows all these different implementations to be built out. And then we can choose which one works best for us.
And that this WebDAV thing is a, tried and true, trusted open source standard, because look at this website. I mean, for anybody listening, we're looking at the webdav.org. This looks like it was built in 1997. You got just a wall of black Times New Roman text on a white background. There's a repeating background texture. Look, they got links to like RFCs and shit. These guys are OG. Like down here, I'm honestly kind of surprised that there's not a W3C or a an under construction badge or a W3C certified HTML 4.01 compliant badge. Proof that it's using standard compliant HTML. But regardless, point is that it's been around for a long time, so it must work if it's people are still using it.
Yeah, and so since it's an open standard, there's a lot of different apps that implement it, including the big guys. So you can interoperate with your Gmail, with your Google Contacts and Calendar using WebDAV. And there's actually two different WebDAV is like the overarching specification, and there's two sub-specifications. One is called CardDAV, C-A-R-D DAV.
Is it cadaver?
No, I think those are implementation.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
So CardDAV is going to be for contacts, I guess card, like a business card.
Ah, I see.
And then CalDAV, C-A-L-DAV, that's for calendar, as you might guess. And so these are two different specifications that are widely used. So that's what we're interested in, because we're talking about today calendars and contacts. And so we're going to talk about how you can use apps that use this standard to interoperate and sync your contacts and your calendars.
Nice. And there's other DAVs, I guess, too. Like DAV is distributed authoring and versioning. So there's CardDAV is for contacts. CalDAV is for calendars, and there's like other types of just all.
There are, I don't know off the top of my head, but WebDAV in general, I'm not sure if there's a specific name for the one I'm thinking of, but it is for files. So
Okay.
you can use this standard can also be used by apps that allow you to sync your files, kind of like a Dropbox or a Google Drive type of thing.
Interesting.
And so the biggest app out there that uses this is going to be Nextcloud. And Nextcloud is something you're going to hear come up as a topic again and again in sovereign computing, because this is a great resource and it does so many things. So if you're not familiar with Nextcloud, Nextcloud is a open source version of all the productivity suite that you would typically expect from Google, Apple, Microsoft. So this is not a single company. Well, Nextcloud is a company that develops the software, but it's free and open source and anybody can host it without cost. Nextcloud, the company, they make their money by setting up hosted instances for businesses and enterprises. In fact, they're huge in Europe, where there's a lot of stricter compliance rules around privacy and GDPR. Nextcloud is based out of Germany. And like, I know that a large portion of the German government uses Nextcloud for all of their infrastructure. And so same with several other European countries. They're the kind of software that they have. It replaces things like Google Drive or Microsoft 365. They have a full Office suite. They have chat. They have front end for email client. They have a file server. So like all of your, the way normally Google Drive or Dropbox or your iCloud photos, everything gets synced. Nextcloud does all of that stuff. But the one we're talking about today specifically is the calendar and the contact sync. And if you are using Nextcloud, you get that free out of the box. You create an account just like you would in Gmail, but this is going to be hosted on either a service that you are hosting yourself on your home server or in a VPS somewhere, or you're going to be paying one of these companies that specialize in hosting Nextcloud for you. And that's actually not a bad approach if you are not ready to put the time and effort into self-hosting yourself. You can do something that's incrementally better than being on one of these big tech platforms, which is you can find a company that, again, specializes in Nextcloud and they will host it for you. And this is a lot better than being in the giant honeypot that is Google, Apple, and Microsoft.
And so I guess, well, let's think about that though. So if I get another company to host a Nextcloud for me, what would be the advantage, if I'm just having somebody else host it for me? I'm just playing kind of devil's advocate here. What would be the advantage of being on some small Nextcloud host versus being with Google?
Well, the advantage is, one, you can have it be fully encrypted so that they cannot read any of your data.
Oh,
and
Nextcloud is end-to-end encrypted.
Yeah.
Oh, I did not know that.
It is. You can choose to have it not be end-to-end encrypted. So for example, if you're hosting it yourself and you don't want to deal with the extra processing overhead, or maybe you just want insight into all the files and everything, you can leave it unencrypted, but it also has end-to-end encryption. The other advantage is that even though companies like Google, Apple, Microsoft, even though they have huge budgets with tons of engineers and security engineers that are constantly trying to prevent attacks, they are always going to lose in the end because they're the world's biggest honeypots. So if you're a hacker, you're not going after Joe Schmo company that's hosting a couple people's Nextclouds. You're going after Google, you're going after Microsoft, you're going after Apple. And despite their best efforts, they get hacked multiple times every year. Sometimes it's plastered all over the news. Sometimes it flies under the radar, but it's constantly happening. So it's actually safer. Maybe it's a little counterintuitive, but it's actually safer to be on one of these smaller hosts.
Interesting. I mean, do we know that for a fact? These smaller hosts just don't have to deal with these kinds of things?
You can look at data. I read a research paper, which unfortunately I don't have pulled up in front of me, but I can maybe put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
But it was just looking at the number of what's the word? Vulnerabilities, cracks, breaches. That's the word I'm looking for. The number of data breaches based on size of the company, and it was basically a not a one-to-one, but it was basically a positive correlation.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I guess it makes sense. It's like the bigger, it's probably harder to get in for the larger company, but once you get in, there's more that you can do there. So I didn't realize it's been a long time since I tried to set up Nextcloud. I didn't realize that it even had end-to-end encryption. So that's really good. So I mean, that's like reason enough. It's kind of like you're taking on if you put it on your own server, you're taking on the responsibility of being kind of like your own Proton mail. But if you just pay somebody else, I mean, I guess if it's end-to-end encrypted, then that makes it easier. So what does it look like in terms of if I do say put calendar, let's say I have a Nextcloud running, I pay one of these services and I'm using it end-to-end encrypted on their platform. What are my next steps in terms of using the calendar or using the contacts list?
What's really cool about being an open standard like CardDAV and CalDAV that we talked about is that our phones and computers already know how to speak this language. So your contacts list on your phone and your calendar on your phone and on your computer, you just put in the URL of the server, and there's like a specific link that you're going to copy and paste. But when you're setting up a new calendar, let's say on your phone, you're going to go into your calendar, your new calendar, and it's one of the options is going to be a URL box, and you're just going to paste it in there. It'll ask you to sign in with your username and password, and then it syncs right to your native phone calendar or computer calendar. And it's the exact same thing with your contacts as well. So you go into your contacts, currently out of the box, you're probably going to be doing Google or Apple, but instead of you doing that, where you're signing in with your Google or Apple account, you're signing in with your Nextcloud credentials, and it immediately syncs it, and it feels very native because it's using your phone's native calendar or your phone's native contacts. And so you get that full experience that we don't quite have with Proton yet because the limitation of them being encrypted in that separate app.
So so yeah, I mean, I know there's like default, like I could go to Apple Mail or like just whatever stock Android calendar app. I could put in like the link to my Nextcloud, like WebDAV endpoint or CalDAV endpoint and log in and get the access to the calendar. I guess if I was using encrypted Nextcloud, I wouldn't be able to do that, right? Not saying it's a problem, just trying to understand how it works. So like if I'm using the encrypted CalDAV, can I still sync the calendar to the phone?
Yes, because you are logging in with your credentials, which is what decrypts it on your phone.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Oh, wow. I didn't realize it was that powerful.
Now, if you're using iPhone, it's going to be ready to go out of the box in the iPhone calendar and the iPhone contacts.
Yeah.
However, if you are using Android, you need to download an open source app called DAVX5. That's DAV, like WebDAV, and then the letter X, and then the number 5. And what that does is it allows your calendar and your contacts on your Android phone it tells them where to look to sync to your Nextcloud. So you would add it, you would create a new account and log in with your Nextcloud info, and then you're good to go. And they even have a provider specific login for Nextcloud that just makes it a little bit easier. So you don't have to put in like any fancy settings.
Okay. And so you're saying on iOS, it kind of natively knows how to get the calendar and contacts from Nextcloud if I provide it with the right URL and credentials. And then for Android, I would install DAVX5, and then I would be able to see the stuff in my Nextcloud populated on my stock calendar and contacts apps.
That's exactly right.
That's pretty cool.
And as somebody who's been using this, I just want to express how delightful the user experience is, because it operates exactly like it did back when I used to use Gmail for my contacts and calendar and stuff. And yet it's completely self-sovereign. No third-party company is in control of my data. And if you think about calendar is a very private piece of data, that we're just kind of outsourcing to, these big tech companies that don't deserve our trust. They tell you who you're going to see, what you're going to be doing, where you're going to be, when you're going to be. This is really private info. And if anybody, it would feel extremely creepy. So it's a great feeling to know that your data is in your own hands when it comes to your calendars and your contacts. And since it's also in an open format. Oh, I think we should talk about the format that it's saved. And we talked about how the WebDAV protocol is an open protocol for communication, for transferring, and versioning, but we haven't talked about the format that it's saved in. So let's say you've done this and you're syncing via Nextcloud or another WebDAV server of some sort. And let's say you want to export it to another device, or you want to back it up on a separate file that you keep on a hard drive, or for whatever reason. When you export from your calendar, it's going to be a .ics file. I believe it's Internet Calendar something, but that's also an open protocol or open standard. And so this is Mac, or Apple rather, this is Google, everybody uses this. So, and the other calendar, or the other format that's open for calendar, is iCal, ICAL. And it's the same thing. It's instead of contacts, excuse me, I misspoke. So I think vCard is
for contacts.
For contacts.
So iCal and ICS, I believe, are actually the same thing.
Yes.
ICS is the file extension, but iCal is like the name of the spec or something like that. And I learned this when I was setting up the ATL BitLab calendar. I did not realize that iCal, I always thought iCal files were named because of like the Apple app iCal, but it actually like predates all the Apple stuff.
Yeah.
I did not know, or it predates Apple, like when they were kind of going through their lowercase I fetish or whatever. It predates all of that. So I don't know. It's just a weird coincidence.
Yeah. I used to think it was an Apple thing as well, but it turns out the I stands for internet, which I think a little bit of history. I think that's also what the I in iPod and all the I stuff stands for, but that just became like an Apple brand. But really, I think it was meant to stand for internet.
It's an internet pod.
Yeah, internet pod.
Oh, okay. It's an internet phone, an internet pad. Okay.
Yeah. So thank you for correcting that info there. It is ICS is the file extension for iCal. And then when it comes to contacts, I believe it's called vCard.
Yeah.
And I think the file extension is VCF. Yep, virtual contact file. So if you're ever exporting it, if you export your contacts, you're going to see a .vcf, and if you export your calendar, you're going to see a .ics.
I remember the first time I got a VCF file attached in an email, I was like, what the heck is this? There was like a thing for a while. It was like real trendy for a while for business people to like automatically like include their VCF as like an attachment in every single email.
I think I remember that. That was back when you would have like a MIME type error, and like this is like when Outlook was all the rage.
Yeah.
And you have your encrypted MIME type, and yeah.
It's like, hey guys, I'm like sending you a business card with every email or something like that. I guess it felt cool or something. I don't know why people did it.
Yeah.
It's like you're emailing me. I know what your email is, but whatever. I digress.
Maybe the modern equivalent is a QR code.
Yeah. Like here's a QR code on the computer. Scan this to go to our website when you're already on the computer.
Yeah.
Wait, I had no idea Nextcloud was this powerful these days. I don't know. My experience with it was just running it on a server once and using it through the stock browser interface and all of that. So I'd never actually tried hooking it up to like the calendar and the contacts apps and all that. It was pretty cool.
Yeah. And it supports a feature you might have not thought of, but it supports invites and responses. So that wasn't always the case. That's like a whole separate thing that had to be implemented.
Yeah.
And so you can set that up so that if you have it, especially if you have an email address attached to it, then if you send me a calendar invite, then I can respond and accept it or reject it. And if I accept it, for example, it's going to say my email address, and you can configure that as well.
Yeah. Is that part of the card dev spec, invites, responses, and all that kind of stuff?
I believe it's part of the CalDAV spec.
The CalDev spec, sorry, that's on there.
Yeah.
Actually, this might be a fun like little segue into like just digging into the calendar spec a little bit. This isn't really like actionable in terms of like, hey, I want to like put my whole life on this calendar, but for public calendars, this is kind of an interesting use case. So we have a calendar here for ATL BitLab for all the events. And let's see, I think it's just calendar is the URL. And so this is the page right here. And it's like, so here's the URL to the iCal file right here. And if you go here, it actually goes to a file that's hosted, an iCal file that's on GitHub. And it is a .ical thing, but I think .ics works. I think it's the same thing. And this is really just the spec right here. So for anyone who's listening, I've got an iCal file pulled up on screen that's linked from the ATL BitLab website, and it shows all of the like events that take place in the hackerspace. And, it's like, it's a, pretty boring thing to look at, but you start to see just how simple these things are. It's not really, it's actually a lot simpler than it thinks. So it says like begin calendar, blah, blah, blah. And it has some kind of metadata about like the time zone. And it's like begin the event. And then, it has like the name of the event, the description, it has like a Unix timestamp for when it begins and when it ends and all of that. And that's basically that. So that's like what it looks like. And the way that we actually make this work is we actually have a repo on GitHub. And so now I'm going to a GitHub repo and we have issues on here. And, so I'll pull this one up here. It's like, okay, here's the holiday party. And we have an issue that has like the UTC time, the duration, and the location like listed in the formatter of the event. And then inside of this repo, it basically calls a GitHub action here. And this GitHub action, it's a workflow. It's like a YAML file that just invokes some automated actions here. And so credit goes to Christoph Ono and John Bahari from the Bitcoin design community. They actually originally created this script. So in my YAML file, you can see a link here to the repo GBKS GitHub events calendar. And inside of this repo is basically just like a little piece of JavaScript. And what it does is a GitHub action fires off every single time. I have it rigged up, at least in this YAML file, so that every time somebody makes an issue that has the event label on it, it will, fire off this GitHub action. The GitHub action will search for Christoph's GitHub repository. It'll pull in it'll fire off the little JavaScript file inside there. The little JavaScript file, all it does is it like scans for all the events on this GitHub repo. It looks for it basically just goes through and processes them. It converts all of the data inside of them into a calendar event. So this structured data like UTC time, duration, location, it uses that to create the VCal or the iCal event. And because like all the iCal is, it's just data in a different format. So it's just converting it into this text format. And then this script, it just kind of spits it out into an iCal file and saves it to another branch on the GitHub repository. So it makes it so that you can actually have a public calendar that, instead of having it on like Google or something like that and having to worry about that, it's kind of like just having like a version controlled calendar in a way on your GitHub repository. So anyone with a GitHub account can do it. So it's just another way of doing it. And it just goes to show how powerful these open specs are, because now that we have an iCal file on the GitHub, anybody can, like, whether they're using Google Calendar or Proton Calendar or whatever calendar, Nextcloud Calendar, they can link to the ATL BitLab calendar and pull in all those events. But the events can all be managed in a kind of open source context. So I'm not saying everybody should go off and like build their own GitHub, calendar. That's like kind of like nerd shit right there. But like just pointing out that like, because these specs are open, it grants you the flexibility to interact with these protocols in a wide variety of ways, whether you want to kind of roll your own GitHub action script, or if you just want to use something off the shelf like Nextcloud or Proton.
And if anyone wants to subscribe to the BitLab calendar, what's the easiest way for them to do that?
You just go to atlbitlab.com/calendar. And then there's like some instructions right there. There's like a link to the calendar file there.
All right. Two more things I want to cover before we finish up here today. One is I want to point out that if somebody's interested in self-hosting Nextcloud, that one of the easiest ways to get started with that is Start 9. Start OS is, for those who aren't aware, it's a operating system meant for servers, and it's entirely run through a GUI, meaning you don't need any command line skills or sysadmin or software engineering know-how in order to host this. Start 9 is not a sponsor of the show, but they are an incredible...
But I wish they were.
Yeah, maybe. But they are an incredible resource for anybody that wants to get into self-hosting because they make it easy. Their whole mission is to make it so grandma can host, right? That quote unquote grandma can self-host, and anybody can do it. You can buy plug and play devices from them, or you can just DIY it on your own hardware and download the operating system for free. But I highly recommend it if that's what somebody's interested in doing. Of course, if you are a more technical person and you know how to host your own server, then there is one other option I wanted to put out there. So Nextcloud, it has the whole shebang. It has WebDAV, it has file transfers and all that stuff. But if you are the kind of person who knows how to self-host something and you maybe just want that calendar and contact syncing without the overhead of maybe an entire Nextcloud installation, there are other WebDAV servers out there. There's a couple of really lightweight ones. There's one called SaberDAV, and that's at saber.io, sabre.io. And that's a standalone app that has WebDAV, CalDAV, CardDAV. And then the other option is, let's see here, there's a GitHub repo called hackdias/WebDAV, and we're going to put that on the screen, and we'll put it in the show notes as well for those of you who are listening. But that is built in Go, and it is another easy to use standalone WebDAV server. So if you were to run this on a VPS or on your home server, you'd be able to connect via any kind of client. And like we mentioned before, that could be your iPhone, it could be your Android phone, it could also be your computer. All calendars and contacts software has the ability to connect to this.
Yeah, this one looks pretty bare bones. So I imagine I would like SSH into a server or something and install this from command line and, set up whatever I need to in the config file or whatever for my credentials. And then I would kind of stop using it from there and just go remotely access it over my phone or like point, Thunderbird or whatever, calendar client you're using towards this. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Since you brought up Thunderbird, I think we should talk about, we've talked about on mobile, how if you're on iOS, you get it out of the box. And if you're on Android, you're going to use DAVX5 for syncing. But we should also talk about when we're on desktop and laptop, how do we sync there? What if we want to use CardDAV and CalDAV? So on macOS and on Windows, your calendar apps are going to already know how to speak the WebDAV spec. So if you're used to macOS in the same way that the iPhone has it out of the box, your MacBook or Mac computer is going to have it out of the box on macOS.
Just the Apple Calendar app.
Yeah, exactly. Apple Calendar app. Windows, before I say Windows has it, I should double check, but I'm pretty sure that like I know Outlook can do it. I'm pretty sure.
Wow, it's been so long since I've used Windows, thankfully. And it's probably going to be a long time unless I break down in about a year and build a Windows PC for the purpose of playing Doom, the Dark Ages. But, maybe I can resist it. But I think what I remember is Outlook was like a paid app, I feel like. Like, I feel like you always had to pay extra for Outlook. And there was some like default thing called like Windows Mail that was installed. But I don't know. This was like probably 2 versions of Windows ago, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, I also have not used Windows in quite a while. So maybe the audience can tell us, those of you who are on Windows, have you tried to use CalDAV or CardDAV? And if so, what apps worked for you? Boost in. Is it built into Windows? Are you using some third-party client? We would like to know. Where can people boost in
Fountain.fm?
Yeah, fountain.fm. And
Sweet, I know how to podcast 2.0.
search for the ATL BitLab, and you'll be able to send in your boostograms and attach some sats to it, and we will read them on the show, and we'll take your suggestions, and we would love to hear your feedback. So let us know there.
Yeah, but and then so that was it. Windows, we're not sure, TBD, and then Linux.
Linux. So, you know what? I just remembered Thunderbird is cross-platform.
Yeah, I used to use it on Windows.
So if you're on Windows, I don't know if what built-in Windows apps might be able to do it, but Thunderbird certainly works on Windows. Thunderbird is cross-platform, so it works on Windows, Mac, Linux, and even Android. And so Thunderbird has both CardDAV and CalDAV, as well as email, which we're not talking about today, but they certainly implement the WebDAV spec. And that's actually, I played around with two different ones on Linux. I use Thunderbird, and then also in GNOME and KDE, which are the built-in calendars for the graphical environments. They implement WebDAV. So if you're on Linux and Mac, for sure getting it out of the box, possibly Windows, to be determined. We need to do more research on that. And then absolutely Thunderbird is the third-party app that you can download on any of those, and that implements it as well.
Sweet.
Well, is there anything else that you would like to cover before we get out of here?
I think that, I don't know, that about covers it. I learned a lot today. I don't know, I could do all that with my contacts on Apple and Android and all that. So, yeah, I think that seems like a good place to wrap up for the topic of calendars and contacts.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, everyone. Boost in with your questions or suggestions, and we will get to them on the next show. Stephen, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you, everyone.
Catch you later. Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to learn more about anything that we discussed, you can look for links in the show notes. That should be in your podcast player, or you can go to atlbitlab.com/podcast. On a final note, if you found this information useful and you want to help support us, you can always send us a tip in Bitcoin. Your support really helps it so that we can keep bringing you content like this. All right, catch you later.